Oh hey, looks like you're joining me on my normal playthrough of Dark Souls. Wait, why do I have FARRON Dart? I thought the Sorcerer started with Soul Arrow and Great Soul Arrow. Well, not like I can complain to Gwyn or anything. For now, we want to kill the Crystal Lizard, and FARRON Dart is so bad, we actually do no damage. So, we lead the lizard to his own demise, light our first bonfire, and run past the basic enemies here in order to make it to our first boss. Gundyr needs to be freed to be fought. Thankfully, that's an easy task. And we need the coiled sword anyway. With steady chant, and doing instability damage on Gundyr with a parry, FARRON Dart does really disappointing damage. But it's the first boss, which translates to a slow attack speed. And we can also get in multiple darts pretty quickly, racking up small damage to form mediocre damage at the cost of a lot of mana, and all our stamina. Speaking of mana, we only have one Ashen Estus to refill our mana, and by the time we need it, Gundyr is a little above half health. But we're right at the Phase 2 threshold, and with another steady chant, we want to optimize for good damage. Then, when Phase 2 eventually comes around, we lose the ability to parry. And after a little bit, we run out of mana completely. Thankfully, we chose the Hidden Blessing as our starting gift. And that completely refills our mana. This allows us to start working down Gundyr. So after a few dodges, Gundyr is taken down. Moving forward, we have the rest of the Cemetery of Ash to work down. Task 1 is this guy. Well, there we go. Task 2 is this tree jump. It's a little finicky to get the right angle and jump onto the roof from the height of the tree, but after a few attempts, it's not an issue. This gives us early access to an extra Estus Shard, which will be extra useful on this run, and the Silver Serpent Ring, which gives us more souls. With that, we allot our Estus to 3 regular and 2 Ashen, level up our intelligence as much as possible, and move to our first area. We won't find better spells though. Why? Because this is FARRON Dart only. Starting out in the high wall, we realize how not worth it fighting enemies is. Regardless, we still want to get as many souls as possible. So, we fight enemies when needed. But there are still very clear groups of enemies where you don't want to fight any of them. Even though you can run past them, some still like to chase you. And we have to dispatch those enemies before we make it to our next bonfire. Another goal for us is to gather as much Titanite as possible here, because we want a good staff. There's some Titanite in the armory, as well as a second Estus Shard, and the Cell Key, which can free Grey Rat. But for now, if we want Titanite, we have to kill some formidable foes. The Puss of Man and Highwall drop Titanite when killed, but killing them, especially this early, is a real challenge. They do take out the other enemies, but they can also take us out, no issue. And they do. A lot. Like, tens of times a lot. And that was just the first one, which was easier. There's another one earlier in Highwall, in a much more enclosed space. There's nowhere to really loop around or hide from this one. And when we get cornered, these guys are just very unnatural, and destroy us. Eventually, we come up with a strategy. If we can lead the Puss of Man out of his little corner, and fight him just outside his active range, we can effectively cheese him to death. This works really well our first try, but the archer here throws us off just enough to where we die. So, we put in the effort to kill him, and get to pull off our strategy again, where we stay just outside of his range, and take advantage of him losing aggro, all culminating in the eventual kill of our second Puss of Man. And with our 5th Titanite, wait, 5th? There's only 5 in Highwall? Well, those kills were actually for nothing, because to upgrade a weapon twice, you need 6 Titanite. and we only managed 5 guaranteed drops in high wall. For now, we free Grey Rat to try and use his ring, and get ready to take on our second boss. The most damage we can do is just steady chanting for now. And when we test our damage, it doesn't inspire any confidence in us. The built up damage might look okay, and that's because it is. But phase 1 isn't what we're worried about. After a few seconds, steady chant will run out, which means we either have to recast every few seconds and find a good opportunity to do that repeatedly, or we slog through the fight with worse damage. And slog couldn't be a better word to describe the fight, because it's just spamming the spell button while you sit under Vordt where he can't hit you. And if you don't get too bored to remember to dodge at all, you make it to phase 2. And phase 2 is where things get real. And while it does bring some free damage after the triple charge attack that Vordt does to start phase 2, it also turns his entire body into a hitbox. No standing under him anymore. And when he does hit you, he hits like a truck. Needless to say, we lose a lot of attempts here. And upon respawning, you have to do the minute-long run back, and the multiple minute-long phase 1, which gets exponentially more boring every time. This is required every single time you want to get an attempt in at the real fight. Getting far enough in the fight, it becomes clear why we need to have 3 Eshinestis instead of 2, which I thankfully anticipated, and switched my flasks just before the fight. But this means only 2 heals for this fight, which doesn't sound too bad when you're talking about Vordt. I mean, how hard is Vordt? But this isn't about Vordt. This fight is posed to take over 10 minutes, and lasting 10 minutes in a fight against any boss is a big challenge. It's a lot of attempts where you can only make 2 mistakes, and a lot of fails. But eventually, one run is looking good. We're in the corner, but Vordt is doing a charge attack, which means big damage. And once it's ended, we're just a few hits away from winning, with enough mana to clear the boss health bar. All we have to do is execute. We then kill Emma for some more souls, and balance out our health with the rest of our stats. With that, we can move on to the settlement, and die trying to save Yol. Duh. We managed to talk to him on our next try, then we repeatedly die in the settlement to get our free 5 levels from Yol. We choose to put them into Vigor, because as good as I am at Dark Souls, the current handicap we're under makes it hard to perform well. There are a lot of generally useful things in the settlement, like the Redis Bone, which is used to progress Grey Rat's quest. There's an Estus Shard here, and the Warriors of Sunlight, which is always amazing to have for morale. The settlement also has a good helping of Titanite, but we're going to refrain from using it on our Sorcerer's Staff for now. We grab the Undead Bone Shard to massively increase our mana restored from flasks, and subsequently total damage output, unlock a shortcut to our next available boss, and light the Cliff Underside bonfire. Before attempting our next boss, we send Grey Rat on his first pillage, which will be important for later. We also go ahead and kill this demon with Sigurd, grab the Chloranthy ring, as well as our armor. Oh my god, more stuff? Okay, I'll just list them off. Grass Crest Shield, second Undead Bone Shard, Crown of Dusk, Heretic Staff, this is why we didn't upgrade our Sorcerer's Staff, Orbeck, Sage's Scroll, give that scroll to Orbeck, and we buy Great Farron Dart from him. And after all that, now we can take on the Greatwood. 19 damage is our maximum per dart output, which seems like nothing at first, especially when you see it on the health bar. But with the Greatwood, there are thresholds at which his weak points will pop, and he'll lose out on a large amount of health. And when you see the fight this way, phase 1 isn't the worst thing in the world. And after making it into phase 2, we repeat this, but smaller. More thresholds to hit, and more spots to attack. Once we hit the final threshold, after some trouble, we run out of damage to deal, and have to resort to just dealing damage to the main hand. And this is actually pretty easy. We can just stay away, and hit him for the win. Well, now we're back in Fair and Keep for two things. The first thing we're grabbing here are the Dream Chaser's Ashes, for its unlimited Titanite shards. The second thing is the Stray Demon. This guy isn't that hard of a mini-boss, but he's notable because he drops a lot of souls. Well, that, and his own soul. Now we can use our souls to upgrade the Heretic Staff to +3, and grab the Firekeeper skirt from the tower to complete our outfit. Now in the Road of Sacrifices, there's a boss we've been dreading. The Crystal Sage, being almost exclusively a magic caster, is extremely resistant to magic. But there's no threshold this time, and we have to take out this entire health bar with Great FARRON Dart. And there's a second problem. The Sage keeps teleporting around, and while we're not dying, we have to figure out a way to deal with this. The solution we come up with is manipulation of the Sage's AI. When the Crystal Sage casts Homing Soul Mass, she's not allowed to teleport. It doesn't delay her teleport, or trigger it after, it just straight up blocks her from wanting to teleport. This is good for something like FARRON Dart, since the Sage will try and teleport after every hit against her, so we're actually allowed to spam hits. Until then, it's a lot of waiting. Even when the boss itself doesn't require a long fight, this game will somehow make it so that we have to wait, and after 5 minutes of slow progress, we lose it. And that's enough to make us reconsider our boss order. That's right, it's time to kill the Abyss Watchers before the Crystal Sage. A positive is that it's not too hard for us to hit the Abyss Watchers, but a negative is that it's not too hard for the Abyss Watchers to hit us. On our next attempt, we find a rhythm of darting the boss while dodging its attacks, which we're able to repeat for quite some time before getting hit. Eventually, the second Watcher comes in and destroys our fun, but the third Watcher destroys theirs. We have a couple close calls with the boss, but all it takes is about 4 minutes, and we're to phase 2. Damage is largely the same, but with a more par for the course boss fight on our hands, with more aggression, and less stalling the boss out, this phase has got to be over soon, right? Well, with the amount of running away, waiting, all just for 1 or 2 hits, it actually takes longer. 6 minutes. 6 minutes of nothing but suffering through this slow fight. We continue to balance our stats halfway between intelligence and everything else, and then we snipe this wizard skeleton to death so his ball drops an undead bone shard. We then break the bridge with a FARRON Dart, and climb down it to get to our demon friend. This was the most annoying fight up to this point, because our first attempt was like 15 minutes of nothing but hammering away at him, leading him around, just a very annoying fight. And we had help from the Mimic and Skeletons, but they all died, and so did I. But on our second attempt, Skeletons just like locked in or something, because the demon went down in like 30 seconds flat. I didn't even have to do anything. But now that we're in the Smoldering Lake, we can pick up the large Titanite here, as well as the undead bone shards. And lastly, the Estus shard. Now we can get a +6 Heretic Staff, and use it to take on Wolnir, who's scarier than you think. Well, Wolnir is the same concept as the Greatwood, and after his 3 thresholds are met, we take him down pretty easily. With nowhere else feasible to go, we go back to the Crystal Sage. Damage is exactly the same as last time, but we have better flasks now, and more of them too, which gives this fight a chance to be bearable. And while it's not bearable at all, we're still able to push through it for the most part, although we do have some thoughts about actually finishing this run. We kill her though, and move on. As we continue to level up, our intelligence reaches the 30s, but that's not nearly close enough to where we're stopping. Outside of the Cathedral is largely uninteresting, other than a couple Estus upgrades. In the Cathedral, all I can find that's interesting is the boss that's required for progression. These guys suck on any magic run, but they suck on this run. I'm not exactly sure how the timer system works, but once you damage the currently possessed Deacon, you have a limited amount of time to kill it, before the possession moves. It seems to be influenced by my damage too, but again, I don't know. Phase 2 isn't even part of the conversation right now, because dealing damage seems to be a miracle. We need a better build. And that build lies in Highwall. Well, it lies in Lothric Castle. But to get there, we have to dance with Dancer. Damage is pretty pitiful, and there's nothing more we can grab just yet, because we don't have the small doll from the Deacons. This fight is especially hard because we have to spend 2 Estus every time we take damage. Otherwise, we get one shot. At the very least, Dancer is mostly easy to space out, which means a lot of the fight is just running. Well, until it isn't. For now, the strategy is to bait Dancer into an easily spaceable attack, then run, and spam as many great FARRON darts as possible. Notable attacks include the Phase 1 AoE, the hand slaps, the Phase 1 jump attack, and the Phase 1 stretch attack. It's just baiting those attacks out until Phase 2 hits. Phase 2 brings with it new attacks that threaten this plan. For this spin, we just try to run away from it, and we get a punish out of it. But lots of attacks close the distance for Dancer now. It's hard to tell when we're truly safe to cast, or when we'll get hit out of it. Safe attacks in Phase 2 are fewer, but they include the Phase 2 jump, but watch out for the spin, the Phase 2 slam, only if you're really far, and the Phase 2 reach, but watch out for the second one. For the most part, it's just these attacks over and over. And that's not a hard fight, just tedious. So slowly but surely, Dancer goes down. Now, it's time to get down to business. After leveling more intelligence, and grabbing another Undead Bone Shard, we run right from the Dragon Slayer Armor's arena. Those of you in the know already know my proposed build for taking on the Deacons. Those of you who don't, sit back. Maybe you'll learn something. The next thing we do is kill Orbeck. And after he mysteriously fell off the edge, we give his ashes to Yuria, and obtain the Morian Blade. We also buy a torch from the Shrine Handmaid, and allot all of our Estus to Ashen. Now, our build is as follows. Start the Patches questline, move to the Rosaria's Fingers bonfire, let the slugs lower you to below 20% health, with the torch equipped to prevent any bleed buildup. Once this is achieved, equip the Morian Blade and the Red Tearstone Ring, and go to the Deacons. The Red Tearstone Ring and the Morian Blade both raise your attack by 20% each upon getting to the slow health threshold. So, as long as you're fine with not taking damage, we do enough to the Deacons to actually kill them. And 46 may seem pitiful, but add that up over a full stamina combo, and you can kill a Deacon. But I'm no good at Red Tearstone builds. We're gonna need some extra oomph. Giving the Deep Braille Tome to Arena gives us access to deep protection, and with some level grinding, we can use it for an additional 5% damage boost. Now, with the final iteration of our strategy, all that's left to do is grind the boss out. Cast Deep Protection, switch to Morians, two-hand, steady cast. Wow, all this for 45% more damage? If that's what it takes. I see a world where FARRON Dart is doing insane amounts of damage. Hundreds. It's showing up as yellow on the health bar. I don't know how attainable this world is, but I want to work for it. The Deacons, they aren't a challenge, just something I have to grind out. And in due time, after many deaths, and much waiting to get down to Red Tearstone range, we made it. After setting our Estus back to normal, we make it to Irithyll. Because we've made it to Irithyll, Greyrat wants to go on a pillage again. So we allow him, but we send patches after him to save him. And to get Greyrat back home, we have to kill a boss. We have one boss in mind, and that's the old Demon King. We're not using Morian's Blade and Red Tearstone Ring right now. We're using Lloyd's Sword Ring, which we found in the Cathedral of the Deep. It's less damage, sure, but we can actually take hits. Lloyd's Sword Ring gives you a 10% attack boost at all times while you're at full health. And we don't mind the little bit of less damage for the old Demon King, who's pretty easy. But it's only harder from here, because the demon takes us into phase 2 pretty soon. Since we do so little damage, the fight is about constantly recasting Deep Protection and Steady Chant to do as much damage with our limited mana as possible. It's a really long fight, but after the king explodes, we're home free. He's completely useless in this state, and we're free to spam him down. Now that Greyrat is back, we can buy the one thing we want from it. The Scholar's Candlestick is a weapon that, when held, increases all damage by 10%. So by holding it in my offhand while we cast, we're doing an extra amount of damage. So now that we're in Irithyll, we have more stuff to grab. There's the Magic Clutch Ring, which boosts our magic damage, but makes us take more damage. Down in Irithyll Dungeon, there's the Jailbreaker's Key, which leads us to the Bellowing Dragoncrest Ring, boosting our magic damage by an additional 20%. And testing on the hollows here, without Lloyd's Sword Ring, we're doing about 120 damage. We grab an Estus Shard from this Mimic, grab the Undead Bone Shard in the Profaned Capital, and kill a second Mimic for the Court Sorcerer's Staff. This staff has the highest spell buff in the game past a certain point, so it's going to be useful to keep that in mind and try to upgrade it. But for now, we want to give Pontiff a try. With all the upgrades to our build so far to try and make Farrondar a usable spell, I feel like Pontiff has to be easy. We get the chance to cast, and with all buffs active, it's 131 damage. That's full health and with Steady Chant. Without those things, we're bound to do less. Despite Pontiff having a reputation for being relentless, he relents quite a lot in this fight. And when phase 2 hits us, about all that's different is the fact that Pontiff can fly now, and sometimes I hit his clone. Other than that, this fight is a breeze. And now that Pontiff is dead, we can grab the Easterner's Ashes from Anor Londo, which we can use to get Infinite Large Titanite. And that means we can get our Court Sorcerer's Staff to +6. For now though, it's still worse by 10 spell buff. Yorm is up next, but the damage is so bad with max output. And even though we get some staggers in, it's not enough. So we're down in the Consumed King's Garden to grab more Estus and to see Osiris. See, damage seems bad, but this is yet another use of our trusty damage thresholds, because phase 1 is easy peasy, and it's just free damage. And when we reach our threshold, we make it to phase 2, and have a strategy. We can get Osiris stuck in this corner. That doesn't sound very useful, but on top of that, there's a gap we can shoot through, and this effectively gives us the win. So, after 10 minutes of shooting, we grab the Path of the Dragon emote, and make it over to Archdragon Peak. The Ancient Wyvern is easy, just a long fight of spamming. And with its souls, we grab the Dragon Chaser's Ashes, and the Slab by Havel to get our Court Sorcerer's Staff to +10. And for our next boss, we have no choice but to cause a hurricane. The King of the Storm is easy. Oh, sorry, that's not the real boss. The Nameless King takes a solid amount of damage, with no major resistances to magic. He is fast though, and I'm out of practice. Even though he does take good damage, actually hitting him is often an issue, with him flying around or covering my attacks with his own range. A lot of his attacks, though, become free reign for some spam of our own. When he's charging or stomping, that's when we strike. And soon enough, the fight goes our way. We level up further, and the Court Sorcerer's staff is finally worth it. With our new staff, why don't we try Aldrich? Aldrich is magic resistant, but we still do tolerable damage. And the Court Sorcerer's staff doesn't increase stamina consumption like the Heretic staff does, which is useful. So even though we get destroyed a couple of times, we're back for more. Aldrich is the king of ranged attacks. If you try or want to fight this boss from afar, you probably will realize that you shouldn't. Another thing is that Aldrich doesn't like to be in melee range. Not only because his melee is lackluster, but he can't use his range. So we have to spend a majority of the fight running towards him. And sometimes when we run towards him in phase 2, he does his arrow rain. Now, this attack is not dodgeable. So what we do to dodge it is run under a roof. We do this a lot. Unfortunately, it lets Aldrich use his range again. But we get back towards him eventually, and we're doing pretty well in this fight. So as long as we don't mess up, we've won. But now, it's time to go back to Yorn. He's waiting for us, sure, but he has no idea what he's in for. We do 1,000 damage on our first combo, and soon after, stagger him for more damage. As you can see, we're getting yellow damage on Yorn, and yellow damage with a spell this spammable is good. Stagger after stagger after stagger, we work Yorn down to his demise. Now, we can safely progress in Lothric Castle, which means it's time for the Dragon Slayer armor. And relatively, damage is equivalent to our stagger damage on Yorn. And it's not like we can never get a hit in or anything. He lets us cast a lot, which means a lot of damage. In fact, we even stagger him, which goes to show how easy this fight is. And after a couple of minutes, the Dragon Slayer armor goes down first try. Before our next area, we have some unfinished business. It's time for us to kill the true Gundyr. Champion Gundyr is a simple but hard boss. Phase 1 is identical to the tutorial, but that's not the hard part we're looking at. What we're interested in is Phase 2. He gains several new moves, becomes wildly aggressive, and becomes faster. He even learns to dodge spells, and gets a free charge out of it. All that to say, it's not enough. We're becoming pretty powerful, and Gundyr was too little too late. We grab our last Undead Bone Shard in the Grand Archives, and skip Sage's Crystal Staff. We don't have room for it in our offhand, and its spell buff is bad. The 30% steady champ boost is nice, but I prefer a constant 10, and sometimes 20, to a constant 0, and sometimes 30. But now, the Twin Princes. With the amount of times I'm gonna have to kill Lorien in Phase 2, I'm not even gonna try with this one. Now, we have nothing to do but finish off this world, and that starts with the Grave Tender under the bridge. The wolves are the first part of this fight. They're not particularly tanky, but they're quick enough that they're a slight problem. It's not too hard to take them out at first, but the Gravetender quickly becomes aggressive, making it just that much harder. They go down though, and here's where I complain about NPC fights. The 2 NPC bosses in this game have shields, so they'll pretty much always hold those up and negate most damage. But if they don't do that, they still dodge spells just like Gundyr, but they do it pretty much every time. I'm only able to hit the Gravetender here because Great Farron Dart casts faster than he can roll, and Gravetender rolls a lot. This is bad enough on its own, but for the phase 2 of this fight, the Great Wolf comes in, making my progress on the Gravetender much slower. And after a few attempts, we get lucky with the Gravetender, and he dies. And yeah, it was pure luck that he died, but thankfully, the wolf isn't bad on her own, and we win pretty easy. And after we deal with Wilhelm, well, it's a lot of waiting for Vow of Silence to run out. Too much waiting, honestly. We open the door to Frida. And Frida, well, she's a boss alright. We go ahead and cast all our buffs, and as we get ready to fight her, we think about the fact that we can't stun her. Damage is alright for phase 1, but in this fight, there are times where Frida disappears and charges up an almost unavoidable grab attack, and the only way to stop this is to stun her. But we can't do this. So, as we recuperate to try again, we just decide that we're gonna dodge that grab, and as we get the chance, we do it. More than once too. Other than that, phase 1 is easy. Now, it's time to talk about the other phase in this fight. Phase 2 would be a walk in the park if Frida didn't force us to move around with her frostbite all the time. I mean, it's still easy due to how big a target Father Ariandel is, but it could be easier. And now that the first DLC is done, we have another phase to this fight. Wait, what? The fight already takes forever. Do we really need a phase 3? Especially one with a massive health pool and little opportunities to get hits in. At least the invisible attack is more bearable. Well, after 5 minutes of running and dodging and casting so mind-numbing I can't edit it, we do take Frida down. But seriously, I hate this phase so much. And after a skip in the second DLC, we're to the first boss of that DLC. The Demon Prince is not too bad in phase 1. The 2 demons don't have very high magic resistance or health. It still takes a while though, because not very high health in the second DLC of a Dark Souls game doesn't mean much literally, only relatively to other bosses. On top of that, there are many points where we can't hit the bosses at all, and there's 2 of them, which is another issue. 1 health bar is bad enough, but we have to drain 2 to get to the 3rd, and the order in which we drain them matters, because if we don't kill the demon in pain first, phase 2 will be a lot harder. We reach the end of the slog eventually, and as you can tell by what I just said, there's so much more to go. Phase 2 damage is disappointing, and there's nothing to add. No special mechanics, nothing. Just a slow fight. And whether you run away, or into the attack, or to the side of it, even the ones that you have to dodge, they're not too horrible to avoid. So the rest of this 15-minute long phase is slow, to say the least. We have about 10 minutes of running in the Ring City to do, along with a pretty easy bridge Midir. Actually dropping down to Midir, we're concerned. This guy hates magic. How are we gonna fare? Hitting his head? Honestly, that's a lot better than I expected. Farron Dart is probably the most optimal spell, if all you care about is mana consumption. 4 FP for that much damage will always be worth it. But it's just about how annoying it is to hit them, and how long it takes to hit a meaningful amount. But again, it's just about grinding the fight out. It's a pretty straightforward fight of staying in front of him, and being patient. And after leveling with the souls we got, our Ashen Estus now doesn't fully restore our FP, which means we've reached our maximum damage output. Now, it's time for Half-Light. I would just replay the section for the Gravetender as a joke. The last time I did that, you guys all didn't get it. So instead, I'll just say that he's tough. Now to Gale. Gale. Never have I fought a boss that I found so easy, yet the attempts take so long, that I die anyway. Gale is about pure endurance, nothing more. And with not much else to say, for the last time, we just have to grind it out. If you made it this far, I assume you're enjoying the video. So I want to thank you for giving me your time. That, and thanks for helping me hit 6,000 subscribers. I'm incredibly lucky to have everyone here to support me do this silly little hobby. If you enjoy, consider tossing me an interaction. It's like tipping the bellhop. Just liking, commenting, subscribing, whatever. And now that we can finally place all the cinders of a lord, it's time to head to the kiln of the first flame. And in the kiln is our last challenge. The Soul of Cinder, being the most disappointing final boss in this series, actually meets his standard of being disappointing. He only gets to phase change twice before we turn him into Gwyn. And Gwyn isn't any harder. He tries to deflect my spells, but they're too plentiful. And in what has to be the most unlikely victory in any challenge run, we kill the Soul of Cinder and link the flame.